Dear participants, welcome to our 7th webinar. Today we have a distinguished speaker, Professor Robin Weinberg, and today we are going to manage this webinar in a different way compared to the previous ones. So instead of having 2 contributions, there will be the second hour dedicated to kind of exercise in which we are going to involve all participants. So we are not only going to talk about participation, but also involve you this time in better understanding oral history. That's the focus of Professor Weinberg. I'm pleased to present Robin. Robin is an oral historian, producer, author, and educator focused on creative storytelling and oral history projects aimed at community building, civil discourse, wellness, and social change. She is an adjunct professor at the Charter Oak State College and Norwalk Community College in Connecticut, and the founder of Just So You Know, a nonprofit that helps people living with cancer preserve their life histories, and of Westport Voices, a community building conversation and storytelling project in Westport, Connecticut. Robin consults with organizations and institutions about designing and implementing oral history projects, and is a frequent guest lecturer and speaker on this topic. She has a BA in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and a law degree from the New York University School of Law, and an MA in oral history from Columbia University. So again, the topic today is definitely relevant for the different ways in which we can approach oral history, include oral history in our museum discourse. And we are going to start now the first part of today's webinar with Robin contribution. Then after the first hour, we are going to make a short break and organize all participants in different breakout rooms. So in smaller groups, and we will have discussions in these small groups, and we are going to explain technically at a later stage after Robin's contribution how it will work. Maybe some of you have already experienced, for many others it will be maybe the first time, and today's webinar will be structure in this way. So Robin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi everyone. It's nice to see all your faces and some of your profile pictures. I see everyone's introducing themselves or saying hi in the chat. That's great. I would love to hear if you can put it in there where you are. I'm just kind of curious where we all are. And also if you work for an institution, or if you're interested in, if you're working on water heritage issues, what sorts of museums you work with, or what sorts of institutions you are, what sorts of projects you're working on. I'm interested to hear, because maybe I can offer some specific, assistance to the projects that you are working on. I'm going to share my screen. Tell me if this works. Somebody nod. Let's do it this way.
Okay, Robin, now we can see your screen.
Can you see? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, all right, I'm going to move the chat over. I'm sure you can all see this part too. I just want to see if what you all add. So here I am. I'm in Connecticut, which is on the east coast of the United States. Starting to get a little bit wintry here. I think it's probably much nicer or milder where you are, but we're cruising along. All right, let's get started. So I don't know where you're all from, or I know something about the water heritage, issues that you all are working on. But I imagine that you're all here at this conference because you care deeply about promoting natural and cultural water heritage. And because you, like me, believe that stories in general and personal stories in particular have power to affect change, to get people involved in the issues that you care about. So I imagine that you came to the seminar to learn how to use these stories in the form of oral history. But even more than just oral history, like the things that we can create with oral history and all the things that we can mine out of an interview or out of someone's personal story to make something really powerful that can connect people, that can create social change, and that can inspire activism. And those are the projects that I try to work on and try to teach other people how to create. So over our time together, I'm going to give you some tools to hopefully help you make that happen in your institutions and your communities. So my goal for our time together is to talk about oral history and how to use it for community engagement. There are three sorts of levels of oral history that we can talk about. And one is that initial encounter, when you've got two people who are talking, or who are, one's an interviewer, one's an interviewee. The encounter between those two people is a pretty unique experience. We'll talk about that. The second thing is the passive engagement that could happen with that story. So you recorded this one interaction. Now you can do something with it so that other people can engage with that story. And then the third part is how you use those stories to mobilize a community group and use those to inspire action. So, and then I can also show you some examples, something that I created, which is not water related, but it's adaptable and, applicable. And some of my favorite oral history projects that are out there that are also pretty adaptable to anything you want to use. So hopefully you'll all have some skills and some ideas for when you finish this seminar and go back to your institutions and your organizations, and you want to use oral history to build community and build awareness around the issues of water heritage, or any other issues that you happen to be working on. And so because we're talking about participation and getting community participation, I'm hoping that you all will participate. I'm leaving this little screen up. I know it might be distracting on my because I want to see if anyone raises their hand. Please feel free to jump in with questions, with comments. I'm not quite sure how many people we have here now, but I think we can make it work with our group. And maybe Herberto or I4, if you see hands up that I don't see, just like wave at me because I can see the two of you here. But I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, we have 47 participants.
Oh, 47. Okay, great. Okay. So if anyone has questions while we're going along or wants to jump in, please participate. It's totally fine with me. We'll also have some time for Q&A at the end. But all right, so let's get into it. So hopefully that's why you're here. If you're here for a different reason, just let me know in the chat. Okay, so here's basically our agenda for today. We're gonna do what is oral history? What it is, what it was, what it's turning into, and we're gonna talk about what makes it kind of magical. Then we're gonna talk about the ways that you can use oral history. Talk about some of the practical issues of how you can plan a project of your own, how you can design a project that will get people involved, that will maybe help it catch on and go spread. Making something go viral. It's not something I'm an expert in, but I can give you some tools to set it up. And that's always sort of, if you know really good marketing people, get them involved because they know the secret sauce. But if you make something that your community finds inspiring and engaging, they can help you make it grow and spread. And you could be the catalyst and sort of the impetus behind that. So we're going to talk. Then we're going to talk about how you can get really creative, what different things other people have done, what sort of technologies people are using, how they are using new multimedia methods to get oral history out of archives and into the community where these stories can really make some change happen. And then we're going to do our little talk amongst yourselves. We'll have a brainstorming and a Q&A. So who am I? Who are you? Who are we? This is, to me, the heart, the meat, the soul of oral history. The who am I mean, basically, I'm me, I'm Robin, you're you, the people at the seminar, but who are we when we're together? Or more specifically, when you are in an oral history encounter with your two people, it's the who am I is this person, maybe it's the interviewer, the who are you is the interviewee, but the who are we is where things happen. So when you've got two people in a conversation or in an interview, something happens. These two people together experience something that no other two people can experience at the moment that they're experiencing. I mean, think about it from your own experience, right? You might ask a friend a question, and that friend will answer it a certain way because of who you are together, the who are we. Right? They know you, they experience you. A stranger might ask them the same question. They'll have a completely different answer with completely different words and a completely different emotional reaction. So it's that who are we when two people come together that's unique and it can be really magical. And when two people come together, whether it's in an interview, in a conversation, a storyteller sharing with a group, people watching or listening to a recorded story, something different, something unique happens there. It's a space where you can build empathy, where you can create change, where you can find common ground and develop understanding between two people or two groups that maybe didn't have that before. So here's a little made-up project that we're going to talk about as we go through. So there's a river in my town. It's called the Saugatuck River. And we want to make sure that this river stays ecologically safe and sound. And it's part of like the brand of our town here in Westport, Connecticut. We are known as this water town. We have this beautiful river. It runs to the Long Island Sound, which dumps into the Atlantic Ocean. It's a lovely part of the character of our town. It needs our help. It needs our protection. So the who are we? We are this community of people who all think about and use this river in many different ways. So if any of us came together to share stories and to have a conversation about how we might use the river, I can imagine the progress that could happen. Maybe someone who needs to use the river for their work. They have a boat, they have transportation. They might learn something for someone who uses the river just for fishing, for food to feed their family. So a conversation, if we could set that up and get those two people to talk about their stories and their experiences with the river, just imagine what you can use from that experience to change both of them in small ways. Because anytime you have an interesting encounter with another human being, you're both changed. And then in really big ways. And there's my whale waving to all of us. Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what oral history is. So back in the day when oral history first started, it was done very traditionally, very academically among the elite. And this sort of field of oral history actually started at Columbia University in New York, which is where I got my master's degree. And it used to be, people interviewing accomplished white men to record the stories of their accomplishments. And those stories then would sit in an archive to be preserved and shared, maybe used by researchers 100 years from now. So it became a method of research that seeks to preserve the memories of individuals who shaped or participated in past events. So generally speaking, there's an oral historian who does some research and is a very informed interviewer, and they practice engaged listening, which is a skill that you can all we could talk about later if you want. And they would collect and create a source of information and research about, and it could be about anything. It could be famous people, it could be obscure people, unknown events, giant events, major historical events. So that's what it sort of turned into. And the idea behind oral history is that you use this research to access different communities and try to get a 360-degree view of a particular event, or of a particular moment in time, or of a particular kind of person. So the idea is to include all voices, particularly those of people who aren't often included in the historical record. And then what you've got these recordings. These are a primary source. So then researchers and historians would use these. They could write articles, they could draw conclusions, they could make theories, they could teach a class. It all was pretty academic. And then what you would do with these recordings, you'd put them in an archive. And then they'd be, on a tape in some media that maybe you weren't using anymore that was hard to access, and people would dig through boxes. Maybe you've all done that in your libraries. You go and find these primary sources. So let's say for our fake river project, you might have an oral historian who would start interviewing people who, if you're looking to collect those past stories of the river. So in my town, the river runs through the town. There's a giant, in the main part of town, there's a giant parking lot. And then there's all these stores, beautiful, charming, old New England stores. I don't know how long, like 100 years ago, those stores backed up to the river. That parking lot wasn't there. And that river was used for commerce, and for the boats would come up, would sail right up to the back of the stores and unload the goods and the products right into the stores. So all of that history is gone now. That's not how the river is being used. But there are people in town who have been here for long enough who either have, ancestors with those memories, or some sort of connection to that period of our history. So if I were researching the river, I would maybe start with them, and I would collect their stories about what the river used to be and how it used to be used to preserve that history. And then maybe those stories would get put in an archive. And if I was looking for a 360-degree view, I might also interview people who are the shopkeepers now who don't have access to the river, maybe the people who are involved in making that change to add the parking lot, and also the people who now, today, as we speak, are looking to change that parking lot into community space so that everyone can enjoy the river and focus on the river and change hearts and minds about what this river might mean to our community. So this way we could maybe get a 360-degree view by interviewing people all around, talking to all the different people with different interests and different stakes in this river and in the history, the current, the future, all of that. So maybe like if I were an academic, these stories would be collected. I'd write a book, I'd write an article, I'd teach a class, that sort of thing. But now we've got oral history that's so much more alive, so much more living and breathing if we're doing it in a way that's beyond academics. There's a lot of value in the start that we have here on the slide. But I think for our purposes and what we're trying to use oral history for, and for what you want to do with your stories and your museums and your organizations, the so much more is where you're going to find the interesting stuff for you. Okay, so the so much more. The so much more, the definition of oral history has expanded. We're including so much more under the umbrella of oral history. Excuse the pun with my umbrella slide, I couldn't resist. And it's mostly because we have learned over these past decades, and really over centuries, is that stories have so much power, right? So rather than taking these stories and keeping them in an archives, let's do something. So here are the 4 ways that we can harness that. And we've talked a little bit about this already. that when you have an encounter, when you could set up an encounter, and maybe it's a researcher and an interviewee, maybe it's two people from your community who you can create a conversation project around. Each of those people is impacted by the act of listening to another person's story, but also by the act of being heard. So if you have voices in your community who aren't normally part of your historical record or aren't amplified in your community, those, if you can collect those stories, it's of such value, not just to your community at large, but also to the people whose stories you're sharing and the people you are hearing maybe for the first time. So when you share that encounter, you get to impact a much larger audience, the people who get to witness that encounter, and in the forms that you present them, because you can creatively record things, the way that you edit, the way that you disseminate the stories using, old methods, new technology, old technologies. You can make it so that a lot of people are impacted by that original encounter. And you can do this very deliberately with messaging in mind so that you can create social change. And now also you've got so much stuff at your disposal, so much technology to create new things with your interview recordings. You've got access to media, you've got social media. We all have, we've all got recording devices that we carry around in our pockets. The stuff is so much easier and so much more accessible to everybody. So if you think about our fake river project, right now in my town, the river is mostly used for recreation, some transportation because it eventually leads to the Atlantic Ocean, but it's mostly recreation. So while we want people to understand and preserve its history, we also want people to care about the river now and take action to protect it. So maybe a current project might be something that's more expansive than just the history. And maybe we design a way to encourage people to tell their own stories about the river, to use technology and creativity and lots of different media to collect and share these stories. Any questions so far? No? No. Okay, the big question that I find, and one of the biggest challenges I find with oral history is why and how. Why should we do an oral history project? Why does it work? And how does it work? Right? A lot of times when I've tried to pitch projects to people, I get the response like, well, we don't get it. We can record our own interviews and we use them for marketing, or we already have those stories because we use them for marketing. Well, it's different. It's not the same as like making a commercial for your institution. It is a much different method and it is a much different purpose. So here are some arguments when you're going back and you have to convince your organizations or your donors or your funders about why oral history works and why storytelling works for community engagement. Here are your arguments. Telling stories is the most powerful way that leaders have and that people have to influence, to teach, to inspire. There's research on all of this. Like this is, we're not just saying we love stories. Like there's research that shows that sharing stories and sharing personal stories moves people. It changes opinions, which is why it's used for marketing, right? That's why story marketing is all, and advertising is all about storytelling, because it works. So for starters, storytelling forges connections among people and between people and ideas, and you could use it to collect the past and convey culture, history, and the values that unite people. Research shows that when you hear someone else's experience, it boosts feelings of trust, compassion, and empathy. I mean, think about it. Like, I'm sure you've all had experience where you've sat and talked to someone who maybe you disagree with, but if they share their story about why they believe what they believe, and if you share your story about why you believe what you believe, you can definitely find some increased understanding and empathy. Even if one doesn't persuade the other, you will see each other as people first with stories and experience rather than opinion, we disagree, right? And hearing someone else's experience also motivates people to work together. That's how we build connections. So, and when you are crafting stories and presenting them to your public, you can kind of help use those stories to form the basis for how people think about the world that they're living in. So you can bring history and tradition to life. You can get people thinking. You can expose people to ideas they've never heard before, right? Everyone can be changed when you hear someone's story. And you can therefore, hopefully at the end, get people involved in the issues that you care deeply about. So here's a story about my daughter. When she was 3, we went paddleboarding in the river that we've been talking about. And she was such a water baby. She loved anything. She just wanted to be in the water all the time. And she sat on my paddleboard. So I was stand-up paddling. And she sat on the front of it with her little life jacket on. And she was trailing her fingers and toes in the water. And she was waving at people who were on the bridge and the fishermen who were on the side. She was loving it. She couldn't take it anymore. And she jumped in the river. She's swimming around. She's so happy. So mind you, this is not a very attractive stretch of the river. It's kind of gray. The water's murky. We were by this giant railroad bridge, so it's noisy and like diesely. It's not lovely, but it's where we were. She's doggy paddling around. Oh, there's also all these like crazy aggressive beasts on the river that hiss and spit, and they're kind of nasty. But she's paddling around and she goes, "What a beautiful lake, Mama." She was so happy to be there. So the next day we find out that we have some old infrastructure in our town, pipes burst. The river was filled with sewage. So fish were dying. People couldn't use it. The houses who are on well water near the river had to boil their water for a while. Like, this is kind of a big deal in the town, but it made us all think about the river in ways that we hadn't before, about clean water and infrastructure and our local politicians and the people who need to do this cleanup and the people who are, now boiling water who never had to do that before. I mean, I'm sure there are 100 stories from that day. But like, maybe if people heard the story of my daughter and how important this beautiful lake Mama was to her, like, that story might change some hearts and minds, and maybe just at least get people to pay attention to the necessity of taking care of our natural resources. Right? So if we wanted to do a project around this day, the day the sewage spilled in Westport, Connecticut, we might interview people. Maybe we would get volunteer interviewers to help. We would talk to every sort of person about that day, people in the government who then had to fight for new infrastructure, kids like my daughter who loved to use the water for recreation, the people who fish in the river who couldn't fish then, all those people who had to engage in the cleanup, the people who live along the river who had to boil their water, maybe people who never even heard of it, who didn't even know that it happened. I'm sure there were people too who had no idea. And each interview then, and each recorded story, is a chance for all of us to learn something, for someone else to be heard. And each of these recorded stories is a chance to raise awareness, right? So, then the question becomes, then what do we do with them? But like, for this project, this would be a really interesting start to a collection of stories that might compel action and activism around water preservation. Okay, so all in all, what we would hope for all of that is that we can, with the storytelling project, and so for you to talk to the people you need to pitch this to, it brings together disparate voices. You can bring together divided parts of a community. You can use stories to reveal hidden truths, to activate public discourse, and to create positive social change. You can use stories to help people understand each other, to see that different people might have lots of things in common, and people who think they're the same might have really interesting ideas that are different. So storytelling can help us celebrate diversity while also building connections between people who are different. Okay. Here is what I think is a great basic plan for an oral history project. So if you're starting to think about one that you want to bring to your universities or your museums. This is really basic formula, and it's a great jumping off point for something that's more maybe more creative, or, but here are the things to think about for your initial success for your oral history project. So start here, and then you can tweak it and design it and create it, bring your own people and ideas, get your awesome committees together. So 1, collect some stories. 2, make something. That's referring to, you might interview someone for an hour. The chances of someone being engaged with an hour-long story are pretty slim and none. So you got to make something with it. You edit, you do a pull-out quote. We'll talk about ideas later. Okay, so now you've made something with those stories. Now let's create an exhibit. Do something public-facing that your community can engage with. Lots of cool ideas for that. Have a public program where you schedule a date, you schedule a time, you invite people in to wherever the space is. Then after that, while the people are there and they're totally jazzed and excited about your idea and your exhibit, get their feedback, get their names, get their emails and phone numbers, and get them involved. People are going to come up and say, I want to help. I want in. Yes, you say to them. Yes, thank you. And you get their information, and then you'll figure out how to make it grow. So this is your jumping off point to get started. So when you are planning your project, you might need to pitch it to somebody, get some community partnerships going. So let's say for our river project, we need to know what our big idea is. What is our goal and our mission? Let's set that up at the beginning. So maybe for our river project, our big idea is that we can create change around and activism around preservation of the river through storytelling. That's our big idea, is that we can do this. We're going to make people engaged in saving the river. And our goal is maybe twofold. Let's encourage conservation behaviors in the general public, like individual activities. And let's get our local politicians to consider anti-dumping legislation. So then we're going to think about how will this project explore that. So this project is going to find as diverse a group of people as we can, of river constituents. Like we talked about before, the people who use the river for fun, the people who need to use the river for their livelihood, the people who make decisions about the river, the people who never give the river a second thought. We're going to get all of those people involved. And then you might need to think about with whom you can partner. So for my river project, there's a rowing club right on the river, and they have teams, crew teams. They might be interested, like their livelihood depends on it. They might want to be a partner. They're great space for an exhibit, something like that. And what community resources you need? You probably need money. You probably need technology. You probably need people, right? You need people to get involved. So this will all go into your pitch and your plan. Even before that, what you want to do is begin at the end. So now when you have your idea, it's not really before that, but when you have your idea of what you want to do, then we're going to begin at the end, right? So think about what you want your project to look like. Do you want it to be a documentary film? Do you want it to be a book? Do you want it to be a walking tour? Do you want it to be an exhibit at your museum that's interactive and engaging? Do you want it to be a website? So think about what your finished product will look like. What sort of, will you do it in a way that invites other people to participate, to give them access or an opportunity to submit their own story? That's all part of what your finished product will look like. Maybe it's something like, share your water story. Tell us about a source of water that's important to you and why. And maybe you can get people to submit a photo or a memento or something else, some other object, and then you might build an exhibit around that object. The other thing you might do is, rather than decide what the finished product is going to be and what the idea is to solicit that idea from your community. You can ask people to say, tell us in 2 sentences, what worries you about water? What's important to you about the water? And then you could build your finished product around those themes that you extract from the people who are already thinking and caring about it. Okay, and then when your public event could be, maybe consider if there is like a specific date, an anniversary, an event that's already happening in town, something that you can plan that's not tied to something else, something historical. So like for our river project, our Made Up River project, there in my town, there's at the end of every summer, the end of June, every year, there's something called the Great Duck Race. And it's a big fundraiser. And they have a giant rubber duck that advertises it in the weeks leading up to the date. And then on that date, they launch all these rubber ducks into the river on a floating track. And they're carried by the current, and people can buy and sponsor the rubber ducks. And if your duck wins the race, you get a prize or something, but all that money goes to local charity. So it raises a ton of money. So this is like a big event, and people come out in droves and they stand on the riverbanks and they watch these ducks float down the river. And it's really like small town adorable. It's very cute, and it's a big famous community event. So imagine if I could partner with them and say, we want to have an exhibit about saving this river. And we are going to make something that's going to line the river so people can interact with it while they're watching the ducks. Or maybe the library in my town is right on the river. Maybe we'll convince the library, or see if they want to partner with us to host this on their front lawn or inside their main building, and invite people after the Great Duck Race to come and engage with these other stories about the river. Right? So you could think about tying your public event to something that's either already out in your community or something that you create, but having it attached to something else makes it just even that more compelling. And also, when you're beginning at the end, think about what you want to happen next. Do you want this to be a permanent exhibit and that's it? Do you want it to be an ongoing project, something that you will continue to create and add to? Do you want it to be then taken over by your community and have it spread that way? So the beginning at the end, I think is really important when it comes to what you specifically want your stories to look like. So, because it will impact how you collect the stories, what media you use to record stories, what media you use to invite people to submit their stories. And if you think about it, like, stories can be presented as audio, as video, as written. So you want to think about what it's going to look like. That will also impact how you interview somebody. So like if I'm interviewing someone for an archives, my interview is going to be very open-ended. I'm going to let them talk however they want. When they say something that I think is particularly interesting, I'm going to ask follow-up questions. But the other person is going to control the interview mostly. I'm interviewing with a certain lens, with certain ideas of questions, but really it's the stories that they want to tell and whatever way they want to tell them. If I am, let's say, making a documentary film when I'm interviewing, I'm going to give my interviewee instructions. We're going to tell them, when you answer a question, say it in a full sentence. Don't use pronouns, use the names of people, because you're going to have to be able to edit that chunk without the interviewer, without that question in there. So you want those people to say, the river is important to me because my daughter Josie likes to swim in it, rather than, why is the river important to you? Because she likes to swim in it, right? You can't use because she likes to swim in it, but you can use the river is important to me because my daughter Josie likes to swim in it. So that's sort of an idea of thinking ahead of time what you want your finished product to look like. Okay, So now back to the basic formula. I did this. Oh wait, one other thing I wanted to say. Sorry. So with my fake river project and the Great Duck Race Day, like I was imagining that this could look like a walking exhibit along the banks of the river with giant photos of people engaging with the river, with a QR code that someone could come up to and launch a story and hear it on their own device, and then people would be engaging it. It could also be, and I saw this project somewhere and I wanted to show it to you because I thought it was so interesting, but I can't find any record of it online anymore. I don't know where it went, but it was a town in New Jersey that is a water town, and it's also the town where they make those ball jars, and they invited people to collect water from their favorite water source in one of these jars, which were made in their town, and then write a story. And people submitted these to the library. It was all done in the library. It wasn't in a museum. It was in their local library, which is, I believe, in the center of their town. So you could walk through this exhibit, and I think it was displayed really beautifully with these jars that are important to the community, with different water sources in them, with a story about what that water source meant to that person. I thought that was pretty brilliant. I wish I could show you pictures. If someone could find it online, I don't know where it went, but I know it exists. So it's someone else's idea, but I thought it was pretty brilliant. But feel free. It's all yours now. Okay. So I did this project called, excuse me one second. I did this project that we called Westport Voices in my town. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the experience, but mostly because I want you to know the challenges that I faced with it, so you're armed and prepared. So this project, to begin back at this slide, it's called Westport Voices. It's not about the river. It is about the town and the people in the town. So I've lived here for 15 years, and I was inspired by the idea of just the general idea of building community. And I started to see two things happening here. One was that when people talked about Westport, Connecticut, they did it with a very flat narrative. It's an affluent, all white suburb filled with entitled, obnoxious people in big cars cutting you off on the road. It was increasingly disparaging, and we were kind of starting to get a bad reputation out in like local press and even some national press. Now, the reputation is not wholly undeserved, but I think it's for a different reason. And one of the reasons is that I've noticed a big rise in incivility here. And the political climate, I imagine, in the world, but I could certainly speak for the United States as a whole, has changed so drastically. And whether it's the rise of social media or the rise of echo chambers or polarized media or our elected officials, I don't know, but it's trickling down into our town. So over the past several years, there's been increased incidents of aggression, of racism, of anti-Semitism. We've had hateful vandalism. We've had just hate among students in the schools. We've had political polarization where the local political parties' headquarters have been like graffitied or windows smashed, like that sort of stuff. It's surprising in this small, idyllic New England town that I live in. And I was like, okay, let's nip this in the bud. Maybe an oral history project designed as a community conversation project could dismantle this a little bit. I was inspired to do it by my years at Columbia. So when I got my master's, I was in a class, in a cohort with a small group of people from everywhere, from all different walks of life. I had never experienced anything like that before. And the magic that happened when we were all together and we learned about each other and we had meaningful conversations was really quite spectacular and really special. So armed with my master's degree, I set out and I went to the Westport Library and I said, we need an oral history project to bring this town together, to build bonds, to get people talking, to amplify voices of people who we don't hear. to unflatten that narrative of us being homogenous. We are more than just one thing. So here's the challenge. And we mentioned this a little bit. I find the why to be so hard. The why in oral history project, it's so difficult to explain to people the benefit of sharing stories when they just see it as, oh, you're going to make a video? We already have videos. So that pitch is a challenge. Be prepared for that. So what I did was I came up with a plan that looked a little bit like this: collecting stories, making something, creating an exhibit, having public programming, and then making it grow. And my idea was a theme-based project. So we were going to explore a particular theme about the town, totally applicable to a water project. Maybe a theme is recreation. Maybe a theme would be the water for food. Maybe the theme is water history, water culture, whatever your theme might be. That's how I was designing mine, as a theme-based project. So we'd explore a theme, make something, create an exhibit, have public programming, get the feedback, solicit involvement, get the next theme, rinse and repeat. That was the idea. So the theme, I didn't know what the theme was, but my idea was going to be to gather a group of diverse community members and ask them, what theme do you want? What do you want to see? So here is the challenge. The library had just undergone a giant construction project. It's a beautiful institution, and they called it the Transformation Project. So while I'm giving my pitch and saying we're going to do a community-based theme and we're going to solicit ideas from the community and figure out what's important to them, the executive director said, I have an idea. How about transformation as a theme, in keeping with our transformation project that we did in the library? So the theme was selected for me. It turned out to be great, but I think it's even more compelling when you can get that community involvement right from the beginning. So I didn't have that, but I did have transformation theme. So we started recording stories of people's personal transformations, and as wide and diverse a cross section of our community as we can. So as far as like trying to convince the library to do this project, I don't know that anybody sees a real emergency. And I wonder if you find that with water too. Like in a small town, maybe people don't see how that emergency is happening. Oh my gosh, cool project, Heriberto. Sorry. Everyone look at the chat. So, how to get people to understand that there is a need that needs filling is, something to work hard on with the people who you're going to be designing this project on, to make people understand what the need and what the maybe emergency is. I mean, I'm hoping with water, it's a little bit easier than, civility in general, which is what I was working on, because your issues are so much more in crisis than this. I don't know, maybe not. We could talk about that too. So the other thing I wanted to do was have it amplify voices that you don't hear from all the time. And I got pushback on that. People wanted celebrity. We have celebrities who live in this town. They wanted celebrities to be included. They thought that would be more of a draw for the public. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but it wasn't how I wanted to design the project, with the voices that we hear from all the time. I wanted it to be the voices we don't hear from. But I did include a very famous, internationally known author who writes it's not romance novels, but she's I don't know how to describe her novels. Women's, like, books for women. And so when I interviewed her, my goal was to get her to share something that she doesn't share in all of her press interviews. It was a little bit challenging, but I think we did it. So the people you include, you might get some pushback on the people you want to include. And the challenge also is, how do you get access to communities you're not a part of? I always find that to be a challenge too. Like for me, we picked 10 people to interview, but I have my circles that I travel in. I tried to get this committee together, but the library gave me the people at the library. So then it's, how do you access communities you're not a part of? How do you have, that's a process to find someone to sort of be your Sherpa, to be your mentor there, to gain a community's trust, to let them understand that you're not taking stories from them. You are sharing. You want to share stories. You want to amplify their voices. That can be a challenge. Okay. This is kind of how I did my pitch. I think the big takeaway here is the goal. The ultimate goal of this project was to launch a sustainable theme-based multimedia, multidimensional oral history and storytelling project. That's probably good for whatever it is that you are going to be doing, and to create and build archives to be housed at the library, made available to the public and to researchers now and in the future. That piece shouldn't go away. It's such a great piece to oral history. So the mission: collect interviews, share stories, explore these complexities, build community. Okay. So my finished product. So for Westport Voices, the finished product was really much like I described the Fake River project. It's pretty much what we did. I thought it'd be really neat, and I think this is an interesting thing to think about when you're doing your projects too, is to get more people involved in the creation of the stories. So to that end, what I tried to do is find these 10 people to interview, but then also I wanted to enlist 10 volunteer photographers to go and make a portrait with that person. Because if my goal is community building, the more people I get having one-on-one conversations who wouldn't otherwise have met, the better. I thought this was super creative. Here's the challenge. The photographers, the first photographer I got is a career photographer. He lives around the corner from me. I'd never met him before, made a cold call. He's like, great, I want in. But he wanted the whole show. Like, he saw the exhibit as, a chance for him to exhibit his work. And he takes beautiful portraits, but that's and I totally understand that wanting to not share that spotlight, but the idea is community building. So I really wanted more. We've got to 2. I got 2 photographers. I got a white male photographer and a Black female photographer, and they made beautiful portraits. They each were assigned 5, and the exhibit came out lovely. So challenge to know, I'm not sure if that's everywhere, but photographers, wanted to be their show, at least this one. So that was our challenge in the finished product. And then the public event, we planned it at the library. And then what happened next for my project was COVID. So we had our public exhibit in the end of February of 2020. Our town shut down very quickly after that, beginning of March. So here's what the exhibit looked like. So these are the photographs. We did a pull-out quote, and a QR code. So the QR code launched a website. People could walk around the library and see the picture, launch the website, use their own headphones with their own device. The first woman is actually the photographer. She was also an interviewee. The other 2 people are they're actually friends of mine who I knew. So it was easy. I had easy access to the 2 of them. Some of the other people in the pictures I didn't have easy access to. So we extracted stories of transformation. The editing process was really long because we did these interviews as sort of more traditional oral history interviews. So I would say one thing is to think about if this is the sort of project you want with short audio pieces. So each audio piece we created was like 5 minutes, some a little less, some a little longer. But if that's the goal, think about that better than I did when you're interviewing people so that you don't have to spend so much time editing. The editing process was hard. So each of these is an audio piece launched by the QR code that you see at the bottom of the display. And these were in sort of a winding, pathway in the library. This is one of my pieces. It's 6 minutes long. Maybe I could play a little bit of it for you. I don't want to take up too much time. It's also a good test to see. It's actually almost, I think it's a little less than that, but should I play it or should I wait? What should I do? Any thoughts, Roberto? Do we need to take a break soon, or should I, you know what, I'll skip this, and I could come back to this and play this for you if you want to hear an example of what an edited audio piece sounds
Yes,
like. This is a high school.
Yes, Robin, I think we can hear the entire interview or part of it, and then make a break.
Okay.
Like. Good.
Okay. Let me play this for you. This is a high school senior named Ben Rowland, who is telling his story of transformation.
Transformation, depending on the person, can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
So I think for me, in my life experiences as a 17-year-old, it's been a lot about acceptance. It's been a lot about self-exploration. It's been a lot about confidence. So for me, my transformation has been finding who I am, learning to accept it, and living as who I am, regardless of the judgment I may or may not receive. My name is Ben Rowland. I've had some typical anxiety and some depression since 5th grade. Since elementary school, I was bullied a lot. I was called faggot. I was misgendered a lot, whether it was by accident or on purpose to make me feel bad about myself. But I persevered, and I focused on other things like my artwork and everything. And that's actually the first time that I performed as a soloist, was at the 8th grade talent show. I ended up singing At Last by Etta James. I remember hearing it when I was much younger, and then I think I heard it in a commercial on TV, and I started singing along to it. My mom was like, you know that song? And I was like, yeah, I don't know where, but it's like stuck in my head. And so then, of course, I started listening to it, and I fell in love with it. It's still one of my favorite songs ever, and of course, it has a special place in my heart. This is my first performance. I was like the big finale performer, and it took a lot of guts for me. I never really came out of my shell that much up until that point. So I was having a lot of anxiety about going up, what people would think, but I was met with a lot of love from my classmates, and I still every now and then will listen to the video, and all I heard is screaming, everyone, go Ben, go Ben. And then also all the feedback I got through social media. The next Monday at school, people come up to me, oh my God, Ben, you were so good at the talent show, like you're so good. And it was just all this overwhelming support digitally and face-to-face that was really reassuring. So it was an awesome experience. I feel like that was a pretty big turning point for me personally, coming out of my shell. Sort of being reassured that it's okay to be who I am.
Okay, so I'm not sure if that audio is okay, but that's general idea of the audio pieces that we tried to present. And this was based on an hour-long interview with this boy as he stood in the hallway of his school. And so his story was like, he talked about so many different things, but we were able to edit together this arc of the story about his transformation when he decided to like take the stage and sing this song in front of his peers who had bullied him and kind of really like changed his life. So that's the idea of the audio pieces. We built a website so that people could access this is what the website looked like. It's a little bit distorted, but this is what the website looked like. So when you were at one of the pictures and you launched your QR code, this is where you got. So you could see all the other people that we interviewed. And if you weren't at part of the exhibit, you could just come to the website and see the stories. And then we had a public event. So on the big finale, right before COVID, interviewed to come and share their stories live. And most of them wanted to do it. It's so brave. So they stood up and shared these stories of transformation. This is a woman named Kimberly Wilson, who was like spectacular. I found her online. I sent her an email. She thought this was brilliant. She loved to participate. Turns out she's an actress. Oh, one thing about her editing challenges. I didn't talk about this. When you are editing someone's story, you have to think about what sort of input they're going to have, right? With oral history, the ethics around oral history require us to co-create. So you're not taking someone's story and making what you think you want to make with it. You are getting their active input. And so she and I had I talked to her about what her story was going to sound like. I gave the recording to her, and she noticed something in it that she asked me to change. So I'm so glad, because she would have been very uncomfortable. There was a part at the end of hers where she talked about being a breast cancer survivor. And she said something like, she's been clean for 5 years. And I had that in. And she thought the way that it made her sound like she had been addicted to something. And so now she'd been clean and sober for 5 years. And she was concerned about being presented that way. So I'm so glad that we made this together. I was able to change it so it was something that she was much more comfortable with. So this public event, we had like over 100 people come to this big room in the library. A lot of my narrators told their stories. And then we also had a bulletin board. I like this idea. Bulletin board set up so people could stick up notes. They want to get involved. They're a photographer. They have a story. They have an idea. They have this. That was going to be my future committee. I was so excited. COVID, and it was COVID. So everything just shut down, and remains to be seen if this is going to reopen, to be honest. So that's a challenge now, is how do we make it continue? Okay, so I know we're probably getting ready to take a break, but I want to talk about, actually, maybe if you want to take a break, this is a good launching off point to talk about the next part, which is what do you do with these oral history interviews when you've gotten them? How do you create? So maybe we'll save this, take a break, and I'll go into some of the other things that oral history can be to hopefully inspire you all to make something really great at your institutions. Good? Okay, so should we come 5 minutes?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Robin, for these inspiring presentations. We had also these concrete examples of interviews related to stories of personal change, very inspiring also for our subject concerning water history, and how to share these stories with the public for many of our water museums. I'm going to introduce also now to Ifo Duncan, who is a postdoc researcher at the Venice University, who will help us in creating also, in managing also the next session, which is going to be organized through breakout rooms. And so I suggested that indeed we take a 3 minutes break, and then together with I4, we introduce the next session. We will be dividing into different groups to work on specific aspects related to Robin's contribution. So we take a 3 minutes, really 3 minutes break, also for technical aspects, to manage the technical aspects and creating the different rooms. And we'll see you in exactly 3 minutes.
And when we come back, I need a few minutes to I want to show some really awesome projects that are out there in the world that you can, okay, good. All right, going to get coffee. I'll be right back.
Thank you.
Hi, if anyone has any questions while we're hanging out or just wants to chat. If anyone's working on anything cool that they want to share, I'd love to hear it.
So, Robin, if we don't have any specific questions so far, I think you may proceed by making your comments on this last slide.
Yeah.
And then we will start with I4 to introduce how the next session is going to be managed, how it works. So please, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Okay, so now we've covered the basics of what an oral history project can look like. So what else is oral history? So we know it's storytelling. We've talked about audio. We've talked about video and documentary, but it's also podcasts and it's interactive exhibits and it's anything participatory where you're inviting people to submit their own stories, and it's photography, and it's all these other things, these live events, and sound walks are really cool and so interesting for water projects too. And it's really anything, whatever you can imagine. So I'm just going to show you quickly some of my very favorites that are out there. Okay, this one I thought, this is called Strangers in a Ball Pit. And this is a project that started popping up around towns, in town squares around the United States. People set up a ball pit, and some of these balls had questions on them. And they invite people to just hop in. They had a camera set up, have a conversation, ask and answer questions from the balls. I mean, it's so absurd. So if you're thinking about getting two people to sort of break down barriers and find connection, stick them in a ball pit. Or maybe for like a water project, what about like a kiddie pool? What if you had a kiddie pool with stuff floating in it, where you had questions about water heritage and water culture? You could sort of riff off of this and do something that would be more applicable to water. But people would sit down in this, it's completely absurd thing in the middle of their town square and have these really meaningful conversations. I encourage you to go find one of these on YouTube and watch a video. You'll cry from them. They're really beautiful. Okay, so the theme of this slide is creating a space to have conversations where people might talk about something, where you get a small group together. There's this other organization called Death Over Dinner, and they encourage conversations about dying with some deliberate thought, and they help you plan a dinner, and they give you conversation starters where you could sit and talk and have this very difficult conversation. So the idea here is you could figure out some way to design a project that creates a space for conversation. There are other projects out there that are more, passive listening projects. I'm sorry, this didn't show up, but Big Story Small Towns is a project out of Australia. It's a documentary project, and the film crew went and lived in a town for some amount of months, 6 months or something, made relationships, gained trust, and helped people make their own stories. So they weren't recording and creating, they were helping people make their own stories. They have a gorgeous website. So this is also a way, this is creating opportunities for listening. You go to this website, you're going to hear someone else's stories. You're not engaging with a human one-on-one, you're going to hear stories. The 4 Chair Projects is a similar project that I did, which was stories about women, from children, having children, to the empty nest. And I set it up kind of as 4 chairs where each chair was a different theme. And you sat with an iPad and headphones and listened to the stories of women, same women at each chair. So you could follow their stories as they went from having children. The second table is like relationships and friendships. The third table was career and work. And the 4th chair was like the empty nesting after the kids leave, that next chapter. And it was just listening. Other projects are, these projects are participatory. So I don't know if you're familiar with the It Gets Better project. I have their website ready to go. I could show you. The It Gets Better project is a project that invited members of the LGBTQ plus community to share their stories. It started with celebrities in response to the rise of suicide among people who were gay or members of that community. And these stories wound up having a huge impact. And this organization has grown. So you talk about those 3 prongs. It started as a story collection and story sharing. It invited participation. Now it's a global organization where there are chapters that the organization helps to fund to work on these issues and continue to collect stories and share stories and create conversations around these issues all around the world. So they have a big education piece too. They've also created materials that teachers can use in classrooms to help create environments that are welcoming and conducive to all different sorts of people. So it went from tell me your story about why it gets better, like hang in there, it's going to get better, to this global movement of education, social change, cultural change, civil discourse, everything in this project. It's amazing. Sandy Storyline is similar, also participatory, about Hurricane Sandy, which is, it's 10 years since Hurricane Sandy here in the US. And it also is collecting stories from 360-degree stories about that. Okay. So those are very participatory. These are one point I want to make. about these two projects. This is a project that a professor of mine did at Columbia. It's called the Mott Haven Oral History Project. And she started recording stories with people in her town and developed a walking tour that you could take. You listen on your own device, but it's map-based, so it's all geolocated, but you take the tour with a member of the community. So with someone who has shared their stories, and they give you the tour and you listen together. And so therefore you've met someone else, you've connected with someone else, you've heard someone else's stories, and you've also experienced the stories in the places in the town where those stories came from. And this other project, I'm not going to go too much into it, but it's a project with the homeless population in Cleveland that a professor did. It's brilliant. And I think the big takeaway from both of these is that when you create your stories, create with your population, not about them. So this story, the homeless project, this professor wanted to collect the stories and found he was met with such distrust by the homeless population until he figured out how to shift the focus, collect the stories for them, give them back to them with screens in the parks where they spent their days, set up a screen with a giant extension cord. And then it developed into activist groups where people who were homeless or living in shelters could come together, talk about the issues that concerned them, the way that they knew how to solve their problems, rather than someone, in a politician's office or in a office building deciding how to help homeless people. They were talking about the problems and the issues and how to solve them amongst themselves, and that's how they created change. I think the key takeaway is the paper that he wrote. This professor's name is Dan Kerr. It's called "We Know What the Problem Is." Right, that population knows what the problem is and what the issues are. It's not up to someone else to take their stories. They were creating their own change. Have you seen this? I think this is I was going to say it's an Italian photographer, but I don't know for sure. This is a project that Time Magazine did. It's so beautiful. If you have giant budget, do something like this. These are stories of people on every side of the gun debate, the gun issue. And in the US, it's not as big of an issue in other countries, but it's huge here. And he created this piece online. All of these people, they weren't standing around this table. These are individual videos that he took in interviews with them, created this multimedia piece where all of these things move individually, and you could click on any one of them and learn about the person and hear their stories. This also, the public exhibit part, traveled as a mural, as a projection. So the projection would go up on a wall in a community center, museum, library, university, wherever. And you can't interact with the mural, you could just see it. But there's a QR code on the wall where you could launch this website that we're looking at now and then click on anyone and hear their stories. The third piece of that was, at least the one that I went to, they had a panel of people on different sides of the gun issues discussing legislation, gun violence prevention, all of that stuff. So that was a 3-piece thing. You have the stories, you have this sharing of the stories, and then you have an education piece that goes along with it, the public event. Let's see. I love this. This is an object-based. So if you can get people to present you an object and write a story about it, that's what the Museum for Broken Relationships is. So this is an opportunity to interact with objects and hear stories about them. And maybe, this is people submitted things about breakups and wrote a story about it. So you could see some of them in the background. They're crazy and hilarious. And there's 2 museums in the world that are exhibiting these. One's in California. Do you know about the Human Library? This is out of Denmark, I think, where you can borrow an actual person and have a conversation with them. You have to hear some of the people. So you can go, I'm not quite sure how they do it, but what an interesting way to encourage conversation among people who are different. Something else to think of. And then the last one that I found that I thought you might be interested in is this is from Storyline, the people who did the participatory project on Hurricane Sandy. They have a documentary now. And so if you think about this, it's about, it's called Water Warriors. You can watch, look at the bottom of the screen. You can watch, you can host a screening, you can have an exhibit, you can have educational materials. It's so holistic, right? They're doing everything they can. It all started with interviews and stories. And then they blew it up and they created this huge traveling, it's on PBS. It's this is what the projects can look like when you start with personal stories and you use it to create something that can inspire action and change. Okay. Those are my examples. That's what I have for you. Now, why don't